in the not-too-distant future, there will be no wars, there will be no poverty, but there'll be Rollerball.
I think it started something, because people still talk to me about Rollerball. It had its own sort of aura. It was violent for its time.
It was a spectacle and an action movie. When I look at the film now, I feel like a prophet.
Ladies and gentlemen, our corporate anthem.
Well, I think it's more timely today than it was back then. It was kind of foreseeing the future.
Corporate society takes care of everything.
And my God, are we closer to that now?
3 men and he scored!
It's the battle of the little guy with a conscience against the big powers that be, and that's what it is.
I love this game, Moon Pie. I love it.
I was living in London. I had just finished directing Fiddler on the Roof and then Jesus Christ Superstar, 2 musicals. I'm not an action director. Didn't want to do anything about space, or I didn't want to, and I really didn't have very much interest in the future, only insofar as I could project behavior.
Well, Norman is always looking to help the other guy. I mean, Fiddler was the pogrom and the Jews and the diaspora that was happening then. With this one, it was a typical Norman subject. He was a man who was going to be his own man, even though he was being told not to be. So Rollerball, again, was within that vein, which Norman has always adopted. You know, he's even adopting it today with Hurricane and other movies that he's done.
I think the whole political aspect of Rollerball is a combination of history repeating itself, like Circus Maximus in Rome, the whole idea of violence for the entertainment of the masses.
In previous societies, Roman society, in the Colosseum and in the Circus Maximus, there were death sports. They've been toned down. They've become the NFL. They've become other less violent sports, but they're still there.
I felt that maybe our society was drifting in that direction. Sport was really building into a much more powerful form of entertainment.
There was a lot of violence. There was a lot of Evel Knievel type stuff on television. Stunts in which actually stuntmen got burned and hurt, and all this for the ratings. Sports themselves were changing and becoming very dark and very violent. A lot of fights were breaking out at ball games. There was a kind of general nastiness, and I picked up this aspect, of course, in writing Rollerball.
I'm Canadian, and therefore hockey, ice hockey, is very big with us. The moment that there's blood on the ice in a hockey game, the entire audience stands up like they're being fed. Because blood on white ice ignites people. And the violence in hockey became focused on by the television cameras.
I was also reading at that time a lot about corporate society. I was thinking about how nations are going to eventually fade away and corporate society is going to be here. GE, the year that I wrote Rollerball, had a profit, gross profit, greater than the liquid assets of all the Scandinavian countries.
Political systems like communism, socialism, democracy itself might start to fail. The multinational, multi-global corporations would take over control of our lives.
Well, when we invest our faith in corporations, of course, we trade our freedom for comfort because we don't vote on the people who are commanding the boards of directors of companies.
If one company and owned all that you saw on television and all that you read in the newspaper, if it was controlled by one corporation, surely that corporation could control your whole thought process in a way.
All of that sort of came together in this surrealistic story, which I called Rollerball Murder. I wrote it in April of '73. It was very quickly bought by Esquire.
I was just fascinated with this story and his take. It just grabbed me.
I said, you know, this is a movie. We can just make a movie out of this.
I optioned the film rights to this short story. I got a phone call from William Harrison. This is Bill Harrison, I understand. You bought my short story, The Rollerball Murders. I was wondering if I could write the screenplay with you. And I said, have you ever written a screenplay? And he said, no, sir.
And although I was a fledgling screenwriter, I knew what a scene is all about. I knew how to, do a character. So there were things he didn't have to teach me, and things, in fact, he did.
So we sat down and started to work and collaborated on a screenplay for about 6 weeks, I guess.
Well, it's kind of a bread and circuses things with the corporations in the movie and the story. They've set up Rollerball as a way to discourage individual achievement and to put down heroes. But ironically, a hero comes out of this.
We pinned the whole film of Rollerball around one man, Jonathan. In a televised society where people were tied together by television, he was so popular, and of course that's exactly the opposite of what the forces want.
Jonathan, he became like Michael Jordan. I mean, he became larger than the sport itself. There's one guy that can do it and nobody else. In that controlled society, the guy winds up having a tremendous amount of personality to the people that viewed him. And the corporation got scared of that.
What can't you do what you're told?
Jonathan E.'s got this conscience, and he doesn't like what's going on with him in his life and the control they have over him.
He became a survivor. He had to outwit, outmaneuver everything that was against him. There were no countries as such, only corporate societies.
What is ever asked of anyone ever is not to interfere with management decisions.
So it's not a very democratic situation. There was obviously a hierarchy.
The executives, the servants of the executives, and the outsiders who are not in that world. The women, for example, are all sort of courtesans of the corporate state.
Everybody seemed to be pretty happy. Everybody seemed to be content. They popped a lot of pills.
At that time, we were just recovering from the swinging 60s. This was Bill's reaction to that, I suppose.
You like poetry? Mm-hmm. I was the majority, I suppose, that said, hey, don't change anything. Don't change anything. Everything's fine right now. My God, we don't want to change anything, do we?
And you must keep everything calm. Everybody must be kept calm. Don't want revolutions. Revolutions are started by people full of passion. I love the idea of knowledge being controlled.
There must be some mistake. The books you've ordered are classified and have been transcribed and summarized.
That's power. I remember going to New York and meeting with United Artists with this idea, and it was so bizarre.
I think it was its own genre at the time because I don't think anything had been made like it at that time.
I think United Artists was fascinated, and when they kept asking about the game, I kept describing the helmets, like football helmets, the gloves with studs that they could hit the opponent. They were excited by the theatricality of it, but I don't know whether they were really sold on that I knew what I was doing. We were stunned that UA had agreed to make the film. That's when I think I was the most terrified.
Casting, for example, we talked about Jimmy Kahn because he had just been in Brian's Song.
He played a football quarterback. There was something about his personification of that sports figure that to me was very believable. Also, Jimmy at that time was a top rodeo rider. He was going around the country bulldogging steers, jumping from the back of his horse. I thought if I could get that macho thing that he had going to this Jonathan who was going to start to ask questions, he became fascinated right away.
I got the old samurai spirit.
But he took a lot of stuff for that Jonathan character from when he played football. Even like when they were playing the national anthem and stuff. I think it's something he saw Butkus or somebody do, getting intense before a game, like doing this on his leg and stuff. And he brought it to that character.
Oh, I told him he was really going to get beat up. But he loved that idea. He was ready to jump in. I think he was very excited also because he knew that I was reaching out for some very fine actors.
Jonathan E. That's the name.
John Houseman, who controls the sport. And Sir Ralph Richardson, who was going to play the world's librarian.
Zero. He's the world's file cabinet.
And his scenes were all with Jimmy. So James was really looking forward to shooting and working with these celebrated actors, too. I was just kind of sitting trying to figure out, could we make this into a film? What was Rollerball? No one could play the game because we didn't have the stadium built. The track was all important. Could roller skates hold? How fast can you go? This was something totally experimental. One of the most creative forces behind the making of the film was a production designer called John Boggs. Here's a man who did Lawrence of Arabia, he did all kinds of wonderful films, and I threw him this challenge. And so we decided we needed an amphitheater, like Rome. We needed a Colosseum. We needed a circular track with the audience around it. We had to wait for John Boggs to solve all of the problems technically before we could build it.
Then a big undertaking was to find some place to build this thing because we needed a huge indoor area. And the only place we could find was in Germany in the basketball stadium that was left over from the Olympics. And we went over there and we got the foremost track builder in the world, which happened to be a German. And we set out to build this huge track. It was a pretty scary undertaking at the time.
Once that was done, then we could bring Max Clevens, the motorcycles, the skaters, and put them on this track and start to figure out the rules.
In the original story, the rules of the game were very amorphous and ill-defined.
He hadn't written it from how the game was going to play. It was kind of written like it didn't really make much sense. And they had guys on foot. Remember, they had guys with rifles in there that started shooting toward the end. I said, that's just not going to work.
We were lucky insofar as we spent the first, I don't know how long, we were, say, the first 12 or 16 weeks, we did nothing but shoot the games. And it was only as we progressed that we started making rules, because in the beginning we just shot roller skates and bikes and goals and bloody heads and war, and we put it together, but then realized that we've got to now make this make sense, you know.
It's very difficult to invent a game.
You know, you've got to pick up that ball now. You can't just stuff it into the goal. They've got to make a couple of circuits.
So I think it was the roulette wheel and the idea of a pinball machine that gave us the idea that the ball could be fired and it could be pretty lethal. And if that could be fielded with a glove and then put in a goal, we had to have a goal.
Norman added a lot himself to the game. He put the hook on the back of the motorcycles, for one thing, which carried the skaters. And I thought, you know, what an ingenious idea. I can get more speed up this way.
They had to grab onto that motorcycle. It was actually a spring off a bike that stuck out and the loop was attached to the spring. So even when guys came in and grabbed it, it had some give to it.
We knew that the skill of driving and handling the motorcycle, we needed the top motorcycle stuntmen we could find in the world, and most of them were in Los Angeles.
Not very experienced in motorcycles at all, but I rode them. I don't think it took anybody over there that was really one of those motorcycle races or anything, because all you had to do is just learn to keep it up on the track, pull the guys, and just use your head with it, you know.
And now it was time to start getting the team together. And it had to be a combination of stunt guys, guys that could skate, guys that could ride motorcycles.
We all started practicing. You know, I happened to be on a picture in New Mexico. It was a Western. Well, we would go down at night and then this roller rink, and we'd rent some skates, and we just started skating again, you know, the music and everything. It was really easy. Everybody was having a good time just skating. So, shit, this will be easy.
Nobody knew anything about skating.
I thought he was kidding when they brought him out and they were holding him up, you know, and he was going like this and everything. I thought it was a joke. No. It was real. He couldn't skate.
There was a European roller hockey group. So we tapped into that group.
And then I brought some more English guys over, and there were hockey guys.
Then there was a thing called roller derby.
Roller derby guys, and those guys were really good. I mean, that was their life, skating. So they had skates that were different, you know, and we were looking at what they had.
Mostly we had to take stuntmen and train them.
You guys had never done that sort of stuff.
No, but
that's something all these guys had to learn how to do. They were fabulous at what they did. We'd rehearsed here for, what, about a month on flat roller rinks, you know. And one guy, even before we got out of here, fell and broke his hip. You remember that?
Somebody broke their leg.
These were all big athletes. These were all linebacker types. They all had a great rapport with each other, the stunt players. And they took those stunts very seriously and had to. They were very, very dangerous.
You boys want to make this team play for Houston, you're going to have to learn it.
Jimmy is one of the great mimic actors. He bullshits himself into that he is the best in the world, whatever he's doing. You know, Jimmy tap dances, he plays the piano, but he's a mimic. I mean, he sees something and it's uncanny how fast he gets good at it.
Well, the first thing he had to do was learn how to really skate well at high speeds. He wanted to do a lot of the stunts himself, so he prepared for weeks, I think.
It didn't take him long, and he got good.
We all got on the airplane to go to Germany. It took us straight to the track from the airport in Munich. And when we walked in, everybody went, oh my God, the track was straight up like this.
These guys took one look at it. Listen, they're big bravado here. They took one look at it. They said, oh.
We can't do this. I crawled to the top on my hands and knees. I got a hold of the rail like that and looked down and let go. Whoa, whoa. So he said, we better have a couple of weeks to learn to skate on this track.
They said, Max, this can't be done. And I says, well, it can be done, but you guys got to skate a little better.
Within 2 weeks, so we were playing the game, and we were ready to start shooting. When you had the Japanese guys out there doing that when they were skating, it just evolved from guys just horsing around in between setup. Moon pie.
Off the rail comes Moon Pie and takes off.
Being up on the top of the rail and come swooping down and grab the back of a bike and drop kick the guy. But it was for real when you did it.
We shot some second unit before Norman got there.
Okay, let's go.
And then when Norman showed up, by that time we really had the game going well. But you know, there was just so much footage to be shot.
This is before Steadicams were invented. Dougie Slocum, he invented this kind of car that was kind of built, and it could travel at 35, 40 miles an hour.
Probably we had about 3 or 4 cameras at a time.
We also had camera mounts in the center of the track.
We'd have a camera operator on skates who would be pulled along in front of people.
Olympic cameramen who had covered the Olympics, how they could follow focus at 30 and 40 miles an hour, I have no idea, but they did.
It needs at least one Houston player hitting a guy here.
He sees the scene, he knows how it's going to be cut, and he really gets caught up. He gets very emotional about what he's doing. You know, he really, really cares.
I was terrified. I was terrified about killing someone, maiming someone. I kept cautioning everybody to slow down, slow down. They just started to go faster and faster.
Now, sometimes they got going too fast, and because of the bank of the track and the flat skates, all of a sudden you reach a certain speed, they just drift off the track. Well, you aren't aware of it until all of a sudden there's a ball of bodies hitting the wall.
The guys on the motorcycles would get mad because you learned when you were on skates, you could crash one of those guys on the motorcycle anytime you wanted.
You know, it's 8 hours of doing this.
At the end of the first day, there were more asses and thighs with huge, huge strawberries on them. So immediately that next day, they sent out for biker leathers.
They had really good protective gear all the way from the ankles on up. Football pads, hockey pads, knee pads, and nobody was really seriously hurt.
Okay, is everybody all right?
I mean, guys would just get banged up. You know, even with a helmet on, you see stars.
If somebody went down on the track, they had guys run out with stretchers to get the bodies. There was a lot of abrasions and dislocated fingers and stuff like that. They didn't go to the hospital, yeah, but they were hurt.
People have told me years later, oh, there was people killed on that movie. I said, well, you know, I was there from day one, and I hate to tell you that's not the truth. Publicity department, they kind of like to say that there was bodies laying everywhere.
Played the Manila Speedball.
Hey, what's this dude's name?
That's our new speedball from Manila.
And they called me out to play this little part. I'd been in the dressing room, and then he drew attention to me, and he says,
Oh, it's Big Honker.
Big honker. Yeah, I remember right at the very end of the film, there was just myself. He has the ball right in my face like that, and he can kill me or let me live, and he lets me live.
So by now, everybody's pretty well worn out. You'd have been there a long time. I said, you guys take a vote. Whether you want to stay another day and do more plays or go home. When I came back in, they were all standing there. They're going up to the top of the track, and they were all pissing on the track. And we knew that was the end of the movie. The guys wanted to go home.
It was the first time stuntmen ever got a credit, you know. I mean, there were so many stunts within the picture that Norman rightly said, we've got to give these men credit for what they've done. I'd spent the 60s with whatever you like to call it, the English New Wave, with Tony Richardson and Nick Rogue, and then Norman Jewison came over, and I sort of went a little Hollywood with him. I would just go through all the film, and I'd just snip out anything that I thought was remotely useful. And then I would then start to just put it together and see how I felt about it, and gradually form it into something. I remember when they came to Neg Cut, that particular reel, Technicolor rang me up and said, Tony, do you know how many cuts you've got in that reel? And I said, no. I said, 900 cuts. And I said, oh, I'm not surprised.
We took a lot of flack because it was too violent.
It's an anti-violent film. Get off the rail! And yet it has to use violence to make its point.
People today say Rollerball, oh, Jesus, wow, that violent picture. But, I mean, you hardly ever see any blood in that picture.
It wasn't very violent at all compared to today, or even a few years later when Taxi Driver came out. The fellas came up behind me and grabbed me, pulled my helmet off, and my head in slow motion comes down, hits the track and bounces, and you see all my flesh moving. But it was still very powerful the way it was edited in.
But Norman had said, what are we going to do about the music? And then he said, I think we should use classical music. I had an old LP of Albert Schweitzer playing the Bach Toccata and Fugue in D minor. And then they brought in Andre, and Andre said, it's not bad, Tony.
It's almost a European action movie. It's also almost Last Year at Marienbad with game sequences, the haunting quality of some of the scenes. There was two different responses to Rollerball when it came out. One was in Europe and the other in America.
The English went crazy for it.
That film played for 1 year in the same theater in France. It was a huge hit in Europe.
I think it's because it wasn't a typically American film.
For the most part, the press in Europe treated it like a thematic film. They had a kind of intellectual interest in the movie that never really got going in America.
In America, everybody wanted to play the game.
They wanted to play the game. They wanted the track to be somewhere. They wanted it to be a reality in the sporting life, I think. It did big business in America for a while, but I think it was more circus and less bread.
A lot of the American critics did not see what a strong political statement it was.
They reviewed it, and it says, second unit action director, genius, Max Clevin. Well, can you imagine going on the set the next day?
Well, I think it's here. I think Rollerball's here. We are changing into a corporate society. America is an amalgamation of corporate states. We're in a world in which most of the decisions made for us aren't made because we're voting.
Corporations have merged to the point where oil companies have been reduced to maybe 6 huge multinational, multi-global corporations.
Communism's not the answer, but on the other hand, free-rein capitalism has its pitfalls.
We've already agreed on that.
I get a little scared when one company owns the television station and the radio station and the newspaper.
Utility of individual effort.
Have we lost faith in our own system of government? Are people really even interested? Are they more interested in what they're going to wear, what they're going to drive, what they're going to watch, what they're going to eat? Are we more materialistic? Are we less sensitive to violence? Do we love violence? Do we embrace it? Does it excite us? Does it entertain us? Are we returning to Circus Maximus? I don't know.